Close your eyes for a second and imagine this. You are sitting across from someone, maybe a coworker, maybe a stranger at a coffee shop, maybe even someone you have a crush on, and they ask you a simple question, something like, "What do you think about that?" And in that moment, something happens inside your head that nobody warned you about when you started learning English. Your brain freezes, not because you don't know the answer, not because you don't have the words, but because somewhere between the question landing in your ears and the answer trying to leave your mouth, a little translator wakes up inside your skull, grabs a microphone, and says, "Wait, let me convert this into your native language first. Let me find the right grammar. Let me check the tense. Let me make sure it's correct. And then, only then, I'll hand it back to you in English." And by the time that translator finishes its little meeting, the conversation has already moved on. The other person is looking at you, waiting, and you say something like, "Yes, I think so," or you just laugh nervously and change the subject. What crifiers? If this has ever happened to you, I want you to know something very clearly right now. There is nothing wrong with your English. There is nothing wrong with your intelligence. There is nothing wrong with your memory. What is wrong is the method. You were taught English as a subject to study, not as a skill to feel. You were taught to translate, not to think. And today, in this video, we are going to fix that at the root. Not with a trick, not with a shortcut, but with a real understanding of how your brain builds automatic speech and a real plan you can start using in the next 10 minutes. My name is William Parker, and this is the Speaking Mindset, the channel built for one purpose only, to help people like you stop translating in your head and start speaking English the way it was meant to be spoken, naturally, automatically, without that exhausting mental delay that makes you feel stupid even when you're not. I've spent years working with learners who could read academic English fluently, who could write beautiful essays, who could score high on grammar tests, and yet the moment they had to open their mouth in a real conversation, they froze. And I've watched those same people, using the exact methods I'm going to walk you through today, transform into confident speakers who respond in real time, who joke around in English, who forget they're even speaking a second language. That transformation is not magic. It's not talent. It is a process. And that process is what this video is about. So here is what we are going to do together. I'm going to walk you through 10 powerful chapters, each one building on the last, that will explain exactly why your mouth is not speaking automatically yet, and exactly what to do about it. This is not a video you watch once and forget. This is a video you may want to come back to, because every chapter contains something you can practice today, tonight, tomorrow morning. By the end of this, you will understand your own brain better than most language teachers do, and more importantly, you will have a clear, honest, doable plan to train your mouth the same way an athlete trains their body, through repetition, through the right kind of practice, and through patience with yourself. Before we start, I want to ask you for one small thing. Don't just listen to this video the way you listen to music in the background. Give it your full attention, because I am going to teach you concepts that took me years to understand and simplify, and I don't want you to miss a single piece, because each piece connects to the next like a chain. Miss one link, and the whole chain feels weaker. So get comfortable, maybe grab a notebook if you like taking notes, and let's begin this journey together. From a person who translates in their head to a person who simply speaks. Chapter 1. Why your brain is stuck in translation mode. Let's start with the truth nobody tells beginners. Translation is not a bridge to fluency. Translation is a wall that blocks fluency. I know this sounds strange, because when you started learning English, translation felt helpful. You learned that hello means a greeting in your language, that thank you means gratitude, and slowly you built a mental dictionary, word by word, connecting English words to your native words like little strings tying two languages together. And for reading and for basic vocabulary building, this method actually works fine. But somewhere along the way, this translation habit didn't stay in the vocabulary stage. It followed you into conversation. It followed you into listening. It followed you into thinking. And that's where the real problem begins. Here's what's happening biologically, in simple terms, without getting too technical. Your brain has different regions and different networks for different tasks. When you speak your native language, you are using something called procedural memory. which is the same type of memory your body uses to walk, to ride a bicycle, to type on a keyboard without looking at the keys. You don't think about how to move your legs when you walk. Your body just does it because you've done it thousands and thousands of times, and the action has become automatic, stored deep in a part of the brain that doesn't require conscious thought. But when you speak English through translation, you're not using that automatic system. You're using something called declarative memory, the same memory system you use to remember facts, dates, rules, formulas. It's the memory you use when you study for a history exam. Declarative memory is slow. It requires conscious effort. It requires you to actively search, retrieve, and construct. This is exactly why translating feels exhausting, because you're using your brain's fact memory system to try to do something that should be handled by your brain's automatic action system. It's like trying to run a marathon by calculating the physics of every single step instead of just letting your legs run. Of course you get tired, of course you fall behind. You're using the wrong system for the job. So the real goal, the thing we are working toward in this entire video, is moving English from your declarative memory into your procedural memory. We want to take English out of the study drawer and put it into the muscle memory drawer, the same drawer where walking, breathing, and riding a bike live. And the beautiful thing is, this is absolutely possible for you, no matter your age, no matter how many years you've struggled, no matter how many times you've felt embarrassed in a conversation. The brain remains capable of building new automatic patterns throughout your entire life. This is called neuroplasticity, and it simply means your brain can rewire itself with the right kind of repeated practice. Now, why does translation happen in the first place? It happens because of how most people were taught. Traditional classrooms teach English as an academic subject. You memorize grammar rules, you memorize vocabulary lists, you translate sentences from your language into English and back again as an exercise. This builds a very strong connection between your native language and English, a connection based on conscious translation. And the more you practice this way, the stronger that translation habit becomes, because your brain, like a river, carves deeper channels the more water flows through them. Every time you translate instead of think directly in English, you deepen that channel a little more. But here's the encouraging part. Just as that channel was carved through repetition, it can be replaced through a different kind of repetition. You are not stuck with translation forever. You simply need to start carving a new channel, a direct channel between a thought and the English words for that thought, without your native language sitting in the middle as the middleman. This is exactly what we will build together throughout this video, and I promise you, by the time you reach the final chapter, you will have a completely different understanding of how to train your English so it becomes instinctive. One more important point before we move forward. Recognizing that you translate is not a weakness, it's actually the first step toward fixing it. Many learners go through their whole life translating without even realizing that's what's happening, and they blame themselves for being slow, for not being smart enough, for not having a good enough memory for languages. None of that is true. You were simply trained to use the wrong mental process. Once you understand this, you can stop blaming yourself and start applying the right training, because now you know exactly what needs to change. Chapter 2. The silent period and why listening comes before speaking. Think about how a child learns their first language. Nobody hands a 2-year-old a grammar book. Nobody explains the past tense before the child says their first sentence. Instead, a baby spends months, sometimes over a year, simply listening, absorbing sounds, rhythms, patterns, tones, and meanings, long before a single clear word comes out of their mouth. This stage has a name in language acquisition research. It's called the silent period, and it is one of the most misunderstood and most skipped stages in adult language learning. Adults, especially adult learners who are eager and motivated, often want to rush straight into speaking. You want results fast, you want to have conversations now, and that desire is completely understandable, especially if you need English for work, for travel, for relationships, or for your confidence. But here's something crucial to understand. Speaking is not the first skill you build. Speaking is the output of a system that has already absorbed enough input to produce something naturally. If you try to force output before you've built enough input, you end up doing exactly what we talked about in Chapter 1, consciously constructing sentences through translation, because your brain simply doesn't have enough natural patterns stored yet to pull from automatically. Let me explain this with a simple metaphor. Imagine your brain is a bank account, and English patterns are the currency. Every time you listen to real, natural English, whether it's a conversation, a podcast, a show, a video, you are making a deposit into that account. Grammar patterns, common phrases, natural rhythms, intonation, vocabulary and context, all of this gets deposited. Now, when you try to speak, you are making a withdrawal from that account. If your account is empty or nearly empty, and you try to withdraw, what happens? Nothing comes out, or what comes out is forced, awkward, translated word by word, because there simply isn't enough natural currency stored to draw from. This is why so many learners who focus only on speaking practice, without building a foundation of listening first, feel like they're always struggling, always searching for words, always constructing instead of expressing. They're trying to withdraw from an account that hasn't been filled up yet. The solution isn't to stop speaking practice altogether. We'll talk about combining these two things properly later in this video, but the solution is to massively increase the amount of real, natural English input you are absorbing, especially in the early and middle stages of your journey toward automatic speech. Now, I want to be very specific here, because not all listening is equal. There's a difference between passive background listening and active immersive listening. Playing an English show in the background while you cook dinner and only half paying attention gives you some benefit, mostly for getting used to the sounds and rhythm of the language, but it doesn't build strong new patterns in your brain because your attention isn't fully engaged. Active listening means you are genuinely focused, trying to understand meaning, noticing how phrases are constructed, noticing how native speakers actually talk, not how a textbook says they should talk. I recommend a practice I call layered listening. Choose a short piece of content, 2 to 5 minutes long, something with clear audio, ideally with a transcript available. First, listen without looking at any text, just to catch what you can naturally. Then, listen again while reading the transcript, connecting the sounds to the words on the page. Then, listen a third time without the text, and notice how much more you understand now that your brain has mapped the sounds to meaning. Do this with the same short clip multiple times across a few days. This layered approach trains your ear to recognize patterns quickly, without translation, because you're absorbing meaning directly through repeated exposure, exactly the way a child absorbs their first language through repeated exposure to sounds connected to context. The silent period doesn't mean you should never speak until you feel ready. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. What I'm suggesting is that if you feel like your speaking is weak, awkward, or full of hesitation, the fastest way to fix it might not be more speaking practice alone. It might be dramatically increasing your quality listening input first, so that when you do speak, you have real material to pull from instead of empty translated guesses. Balance both, but never underestimate how much listening builds the foundation that speaking depends on. Chapter 3. Stop learning words, start learning chunks. Here is one of the biggest shifts in mindset that will change how quickly you become an automatic speaker. Most language learners think in terms of individual words. They learn the word happy, they learn the word disappoint, they learn the word opportunity, and they store these words separately in their memory, like items on a shopping list. Then, when they try to speak, they attempt to grab individual words and stack them together into a sentence in real time, applying grammar rules consciously as they go. This is incredibly slow, and it's also not how native speakers actually process language. Native speakers don't think in single words when they speak fluently. They think in chunks, sometimes called collocations or fixed expressions, which are groups of words that are stored and retrieved together as a single unit. For example, a native speaker doesn't construct the phrase "I couldn't agree more" by separately choosing the words "I," "could," "not," "agree," and "more," and then arranging them according to grammar rules in real time. Instead, that entire phrase exists in their brain as one single chunk, stored and retrieved instantly, the same way you instantly retrieve your own name without thinking about how to spell it or pronounce it. This is why fluent speakers sound so smooth and fast, while learners who think word by word sound choppy and slow, constantly pausing to figure out the next piece. It's not that fluent speakers are smarter or have better grammar knowledge. It's that they have thousands of these pre-built chunks stored in their procedural memory, ready to be pulled out instantly without any real-time construction needed. So what does this mean for you practically? It means you need to shift your entire learning approach from memorizing individual words to memorizing useful chunks and phrases in context. Instead of learning the word interested as a standalone vocabulary item, learn the chunk I'm really interested in. Instead of learning the word matter as an isolated word, learn the chunk it doesn't matter to me. Instead of learning appreciate alone, learn I would really appreciate it if. These chunks come with built-in grammar, built-in natural word order, and built-in usage context, which means when you use them, you don't have to think about grammar rules at all, because the grammar is already baked into the chunk. Here's a practical way to build this skill. Whenever you come across a new phrase in something you're watching, reading, or listening to, don't just write down the single word that seems unfamiliar. Write down the entire chunk of words surrounding it, the natural expression as it was actually used. Build yourself a personal collection of these chunks, maybe 15 to 20 new ones per week, and practice saying them out loud repeatedly in different example sentences until they start to feel automatic in your mouth, not just familiar in your mind. I also want you to pay close attention to what are called functional chunks, phrases that don't necessarily carry big meaning on their own, but are used constantly to keep conversation flowing. Phrases like, "What I mean is, the thing is, to be honest, if you ask me, that reminds me of, and I was just thinking." These small connector chunks are used so frequently in natural conversation that mastering even 20 or 30 of them will dramatically increase how smooth and automatic your speech feels, because they give your brain a tiny moment of automatic flow while your mind prepares the next part of what you want to say. Fluent speakers use these connector chunks constantly, almost like verbal breathing space, and learners who master them sound noticeably more natural almost overnight. The reason this chunk-based approach works so well ties directly back to what we discussed about procedural memory in Chapter 1. When you drill chunks repeatedly, saying them out loud, using them in different contexts, hearing them again and again, you are literally building automatic muscle memory patterns in your speech system, the exact thing that allows you to speak without consciously constructing sentences. Word-by-word learning keeps you stuck in conscious, effortful construction. Chunk-by-chunk learning moves you toward automatic, effortless production. This single shift, more than almost anything else, is what separates learners who are always translating from learners who simply speak. Chapter 4: Building the Habit of Thinking in English. Now let's talk about something that most courses never teach you directly, but that changed everything for the students I've worked with who made the fastest progress toward automatic speech. It's the habit of thinking in English throughout your day, not just when you're actively studying or in a conversation, but during ordinary moments when nobody is even watching or listening. Here's why this matters so much. Your inner voice, the quiet narration running through your mind as you go about your day, is one of the strongest habits shaping how your brain processes language. If your inner voice runs constantly in your native language, then even during moments when you're not actively speaking English, your brain is reinforcing native language dominance, strengthening that same translation channel we talked about earlier. But if you deliberately practice shifting that inner voice into English, even for short periods, you begin building direct English thought patterns that don't rely on translation at all. This might sound difficult at first, and it will feel strange in the beginning, almost like trying to write with your non-dominant hand. But like any new physical skill, it becomes more natural the more you practice it, and you don't need to dedicate special study time to do this. You can practice it during moments that are already part of your day. Here's exactly how to start. Choose simple, everyday moments, making your morning coffee, walking to your car, washing dishes, waiting in line, and narrate what you're doing silently in your head using English. Not translating from your native language, but simply describing directly in English what's happening around you and what you're thinking. For example, while making coffee, you might think, "Okay, I need to fill the kettle. The water is heating up now. I should grab a mug. I think I'll have it with a little bit of milk today." These are simple sentences, nothing complicated, but the act of thinking them directly in English without translating first is exactly the exercise that trains your brain to bypass the translation step. In the beginning, you will naturally want to think the thought in your native language first and then translate it, and that's completely fine, that's part of the process. But keep gently redirecting yourself back to direct English thought. Over time, and I mean weeks, not years, this redirection becomes easier and faster, until eventually direct English thought becomes the default for simple everyday situations without any conscious effort at all. I also recommend expanding this practice into imagined conversations. While you're doing something mundane, like folding laundry or commuting, imagine a conversation you might have later that day, or a conversation you wish you'd had better in the past. Run through it in your head in English, imagining both what you would say and what the other person might respond. This kind of mental rehearsal has been shown in both language learning research and sports psychology research to build real neural pathways almost as effectively as actual physical practice, because your brain doesn't fully distinguish between vividly imagined action and real action when it comes to building certain types of automatic patterns. Another powerful version of this practice is what I call the narrator habit. For just 5 or 10 minutes a day, deliberately narrate your actions out loud, in a quiet space where you won't feel embarrassed, speaking in English about exactly what you're doing in that moment. I'm opening my laptop now. I'm going to check my messages. I have a few emails I need to reply to. This one looks important. This exercise does something incredibly valuable. It forces you to produce spontaneous English speech about topics you already fully understand, since you're describing your own actions and thoughts, which removes the pressure of needing new ideas and lets you focus entirely on smooth, direct, automatic production. The goal across all of these exercises is the same: building a direct line between your thoughts and English words, without your native language acting as a translator in between. This is, without exaggeration, one of the single most powerful habits you can build if your goal is truly automatic English speech, because it trains the exact mental pathway that conversation demands: real-time, direct, unplanned thought expressed immediately in English. Chapter 5: The Shadowing Technique That Trains Your Mouth Like a Muscle. Let's talk now about a technique that professional interpreters, polyglots, and serious language learners around the world consider one of the single most effective tools for building automatic, natural-sounding speech. It's called shadowing, and if you've never heard of it before, what you're about to learn could genuinely transform your pronunciation, your rhythm, your speed, and your overall automatic fluency faster than almost any other single exercise. Shadowing means listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say almost simultaneously, following just a second or two behind them, like a shadow following a person's movements. You're not translating what they say, you're not analyzing the grammar, you're not even necessarily focusing on the meaning in that exact moment. Your entire focus is on mimicking their sounds, their rhythm, their intonation, their pace, as closely and as immediately as you can, using your mouth, your breath, and your voice the way an actor mimics an accent. Here's why this exercise is so powerful for building automatic speech specifically. Remember, in Chapter 1, we talked about how automatic speech lives in procedural memory, the same memory system responsible for physical movement patterns. Shadowing directly trains your speech muscles, your tongue, your lips, your jaw, your breathing pattern, to physically produce the sounds and rhythms of English quickly and repeatedly, building real muscle memory in the literal physical sense. This is completely different from grammar study or vocabulary memorization, which mostly train your conscious declarative memory. Shadowing bypasses that conscious layer almost entirely, because you don't have time to think, analyze, or translate while you're shadowing. You simply have to move your mouth and produce sound in real time, following the native speaker as closely as possible. Let me walk you through exactly how to practice shadowing effectively. First, choose your audio source. Ideally something with clear pronunciation, natural conversational speed, and content that genuinely interests you, because you'll be listening to the same short clip many times, so it helps if it's something you actually enjoy. A 1 to 3 minute clip is perfect for beginners. You don't need long content for this exercise to work. Second, listen to the clip a few times first without trying to shadow, just to get comfortable with the content, the vocabulary, and the general meaning. There's no rush here. Take your time to understand what's being said before you try to mimic it. Third, begin the actual shadowing process. Play the audio and start speaking along with it, following about half a second to 1 second behind the speaker. In the beginning, don't worry if you fall behind or mess up words. This is completely normal and expected. Your goal isn't perfect accuracy in the first attempt. Your goal is building the habit of your mouth moving quickly and fluidly to produce English sounds under real-time pressure. Focus especially on matching the rhythm and the music of the sentence, the rise and fall, the stress on certain words, the connected speech where words blend together, rather than don't you becoming don'tcha, going to becoming gonna. This is exactly how native speakers actually talk, and mimicking it, rather than the slow, overly clear pronunciation from textbook audio, is what makes your speech sound genuinely natural. Fourth, repeat the same clip multiple times, maybe 5 to 10 times, across one practice session, or even spread across a few days. Each repetition, you'll notice you fall behind less, your mouth moves more smoothly, and the phrases start to feel less foreign and more automatic. This repeated physical practice is exactly what builds the muscle memory we've been talking about throughout this entire video. I recommend practicing shadowing for just 10 to 15 minutes a day, consistently, rather than doing one long exhausting session once a week. Consistency matters far more than duration when you're building automatic muscle patterns. The same way a musician practicing scales for 15 minutes daily improves far faster than someone who practices for 3 hours once a month. Your mouth, like any muscle, responds best to frequent, moderate, consistent training. One more important tip. Don't just shadow silently in your head, and don't shadow at a whisper either. Speak at a normal, full volume, really moving your mouth, engaging your full articulation. This might feel uncomfortable, or even a little silly at first, especially if you're practicing somewhere someone might hear you, but this full physical engagement is exactly what builds real muscle memory. Half-hearted, quiet mumbling doesn't train your speech muscles nearly as effectively as full, committed, out-loud practice. Over weeks of consistent shadowing practice, you will notice something remarkable happening. Your mouth starts producing English sounds and rhythms more quickly, more smoothly, and with far less conscious effort, even in situations outside of your shadowing practice, in real conversations, because you've physically trained the muscles and neural pathways responsible for automatic English production. This is not a small technique. This is one of the core pillars of becoming an automatic English speaker, and I genuinely encourage you to start incorporating it into your daily routine starting today. Chapter 6. Overcoming the fear that freezes your speech. Let's shift now from technique to psychology, because I want to be completely honest with you about something. You can know every single strategy in this video perfectly. You can practice chunking, shadowing, and thinking in English every single day, and you can still freeze in real conversations if there's an emotional barrier standing in the way. That barrier, for the vast majority of learners struggling to speak automatically, is fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of sounding stupid, fear of being judged, fear of embarrassing yourself in front of native speakers, or even in front of other learners. This fear is not irrational, and I want to acknowledge that clearly before we talk about how to overcome it. Many learners have had genuinely painful experiences, being laughed at, being corrected harshly, being made to feel small because of an accent or a grammar mistake. If this has happened to you, that pain is real, and it makes complete sense that your brain would now associate speaking English with danger, with social risk, with the possibility of humiliation. And here's the important part to understand. When your brain perceives a situation as dangerous or threatening, it doesn't just create emotional discomfort, it actually impairs your cognitive performance in that exact moment. This connects directly back to the biology we discussed earlier. When you feel anxious or threatened, your body activates what's often called the fight, flight, or freeze response, releasing stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones are incredibly useful if you're being chased by a dangerous animal, but they are terrible for language processing because they redirect your brain's resources away from higher-level thinking, working memory, and language retrieval toward pure survival functions. This is precisely why you might know a word perfectly well in a calm, comfortable moment, but completely blank on that same word the instant you feel nervous in front of someone. It's not that you forgot the word, it's that your nervous system temporarily blocked access to it, prioritizing survival over vocabulary retrieval. So how do we fix this? Not by pretending the fear doesn't exist, and not by simply telling yourself to be more confident, because that rarely works on its own. We fix this the same way we fix any fear, through gradual, repeated, positive exposure that slowly teaches your nervous system that speaking English is actually safe, not dangerous. Here's a practical approach. Start with low-stakes speaking situations, ones where the emotional risk feels manageable rather than overwhelming. This might mean speaking out loud alone in your room, using the narrator technique we discussed in Chapter 4. It might mean speaking with a supportive friend who won't judge you. It might mean practicing with a language exchange partner who is also a learner and who understands exactly what you're going through because they're navigating the same journey. Each time you speak in these lower pressure environments and nothing bad happens, no laughing, no harsh judgment, your nervous system slowly updates its threat assessment, learning bit by bit that speaking English does not equal danger. I also want to directly challenge the belief that mistakes are shameful, because this belief is doing enormous damage to your progress. Every single fluent speaker you admire, every person who speaks English automatically and confidently, made thousands upon thousands of mistakes on their way to that fluency. Mistakes are not a sign of failure, they are literally the mechanism through which learning happens. Every time you make a mistake and either notice it yourself or receive gentle correction, your brain adjusts its internal model of the language slightly, making the correct pattern a little more accessible next time. A conversation full of small mistakes, but full of genuine communication, is infinitely more valuable for your progress than silence out of fear of imperfection. Here's a reframe I want you to genuinely adopt, not just intellectually understand, but actually feel. Instead of viewing speaking practice as a test where mistakes mean failure, view it as physical therapy for a muscle that's been underused. Nobody expects a person recovering from an injury to walk perfectly on their very first attempt at physical therapy. Wobbling, needing support, moving slowly, these are all expected and completely normal parts of the recovery process, not signs that something is wrong. Your speaking muscles are the same. They need gentle, repeated, forgiving practice to strengthen, and expecting perfection from day one is like expecting someone in physical therapy to run a marathon on their first day. Practically, I recommend deliberately seeking out low-pressure speaking opportunities multiple times per week and consciously celebrating the act of speaking itself, regardless of how many mistakes you made. Did you speak out loud in English today, even for 2 minutes, even with mistakes? That's a win. Write it down if it helps. Track these small wins, because over time, this consistent positive reinforcement genuinely rewires your emotional relationship with speaking English, transforming it from a source of anxiety into, eventually, a source of confidence and even enjoyment. Chapter 7. The Power of Sentence Patterns and Substitution Drills. Let's return now to a very practical, structured technique that dramatically speeds up your journey toward automatic speech, something I call sentence pattern training, sometimes known in language teaching circles as substitution drills. This technique bridges the gap between passive understanding and active automatic production, and it's one of the fastest ways to build real speaking fluency, especially when combined with everything we've already discussed. Here's the core idea. Instead of learning grammar as an abstract set of rules, you learn grammar as physically practiced patterns, drilled repeatedly with different vocabulary substituted into the same structure, until the entire pattern becomes automatic in your mouth. This might sound similar to the chunking concept from Chapter 3, and it is related, but sentence pattern training goes a step further, deliberately practicing variation within a fixed structure to build true flexible automaticity, not just memorization of a single fixed phrase. Let me show you exactly how this works with an example. Take the pattern, I used to, plus a verb, plus additional details. You start with one sentence, I used to live in a small town. Then, instead of moving on to a completely new topic, you practice the same pattern with different substitutions, out loud, one after another. I used to play soccer every weekend. I used to be afraid of speaking English. I used to think grammar was the most important thing. I used to work in a completely different job. Notice how the grammatical structure stays exactly the same each time, but the content changes. This repetition, with variation, is exactly what builds flexible automatic control over a grammar pattern, rather than just memorizing one single sentence that only works in one specific context. Why does this work so well? Because real conversations require flexible, spontaneous use of grammar patterns applied to whatever topic comes up in that moment. If you've only ever memorized fixed example sentences from a textbook, you can recognize and understand the pattern, but you struggle to spontaneously generate new sentences using that same pattern about a topic you didn't specifically prepare for. Substitution drilling trains exactly this flexible, spontaneous generation because you're practicing applying the same underlying structure to constantly changing content, which is precisely what real conversation demands of you. Here's how to build this into your daily practice. Choose one grammar pattern or sentence structure per week, something you know conceptually but don't yet use automatically in conversation. This could be conditional sentences: if I had more time, I would travel more. It could be present perfect for experience: I have never tried, I have already, I haven't yet. It could be question formation: what do you think about? How long have you? Why did you decide to? Whatever pattern you choose, write down the basic structure clearly, and then practice generating 10 to 15 different sentences using that exact structure out loud about topics from your own real life whenever possible, since personally relevant content sticks in memory far more effectively than random textbook examples. Push yourself to do this without long pauses between sentences. The goal is to build speed and automaticity, not to carefully construct each sentence like a puzzle. If you get stuck on a particular sentence, that's completely fine. Just move quickly to a simpler version and keep the momentum going. Over several days of practicing the same pattern with new content each time, you'll notice something wonderful happening. The pattern starts to feel less like a rule you're applying and more like a natural way of expressing yourself. Exactly the shift from declarative to procedural memory we discussed back in Chapter 1. I also strongly recommend combining pattern practice with the shadowing technique from Chapter 5. After you've drilled a pattern with your own substitutions, find real audio content where native speakers use that same pattern naturally and shadow those examples specifically. This combination, generating your own sentences with the pattern, then hearing and mimicking native speakers using the same pattern, creates incredibly strong, well-rounded automatic mastery, engaging both your active production skills and your listening and mimicry skills together. Over time, as you work through multiple patterns using this method, week by week, you'll build up a genuinely impressive internal library of automatic grammar structures that you can flexibly apply to whatever you want to say in real time without consciously thinking through grammar rules. This is precisely what separates fluent, automatic speakers from learners stuck at an intermediate plateau, a large collection of flexible, automatically accessible sentence patterns built through consistent, deliberate, spoken practice rather than passive rule memorization. Chapter 8: Training your ear to catch natural fast speech. One of the most frustrating experiences for English learners happens not when they're speaking, but when they're listening. You understand a native speaker perfectly well when they speak slowly and clearly, maybe in a classroom setting or in a carefully produced learning video. But the moment you're in a real conversation, or watching an unscripted show, or listening to two native speakers talk to each other naturally, everything suddenly sounds like a blur of fast, connected, mumbled sound, and you feel completely lost. This experience is incredibly common, and understanding why it happens is the first step to fixing it. Natural spoken English is dramatically different from the careful, clearly enunciated English found in most textbooks and beginner learning materials. In real natural speech, native speakers constantly blend words together, drop sounds, and use contractions and reductions that simply don't exist in written or formally spoken English. Want to becomes wanna, going to becomes gonna, what are you doing becomes what you're doing, or even just what you're doing. Did you eat becomes did you eat. I don't know becomes something closer to I dunno, spoken almost as a single sound rather than three separate words. If you've only ever trained your ear on slow, clearly pronounced textbook audio, none of this connected natural speech matches what you've practiced, and your brain simply cannot process it fast enough, even if you actually know all the individual words being used. This is a listening problem, not a vocabulary or grammar problem, and it requires specific targeted training to fix, separate from general listening practice. Here's how to train your ear specifically for this challenge. First, you need to deliberately study what's called connected speech, the patterns of how words blend, link, and reduce when spoken naturally at normal conversational speed. There are three main patterns worth understanding. Linking, where a consonant sound at the end of one word connects smoothly to a vowel sound at the beginning of the next word, turning an idea into something that sounds like an idea. Reduction, where certain small function words like to, for, of, and them get shortened and softened, almost swallowed within the sentence. And assimilation, where sounds change slightly to blend more easily with neighboring sounds, like did you often sounding closer to did ya. Once you understand these patterns exist, actively listen for them in real content. Choose short clips of natural, unscripted English, interviews, casual conversations, podcasts where people talk spontaneously rather than reading from a script, and specifically listen for these connected speech patterns. At first, you'll likely need to slow the audio down. Most video platforms allow you to reduce playback speed, and listening at 75 or 80% speed initially can help your ear catch these patterns before jumping to full natural speed. I recommend a specific exercise called dictation practice for building this skill rapidly. Choose a short clip, just 15 to 30 seconds of natural conversational speech. Listen to it and try to write down exactly what you hear, word for word, including all the reductions and connections as best you can. Then compare what you wrote to an actual transcript of the audio. Notice exactly where you missed something and pay close attention to why. Was a word reduced in a way you didn't expect? Did two words blend together in a way that confused you? This exercise, done consistently even for just 10 minutes a few times a week, dramatically sharpens your ability to pass fast natural speech, because you're forcing your brain to actively notice and process the specific sound patterns that were previously invisible to you. Combine this with plenty of exposure to genuinely native, unscripted content, rather than only relying on content specifically produced for language learners. Learner-focused content is wonderful for building foundational vocabulary and grammar, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with using it, especially early in your journey. But if your specific goal is training your ear for real-world natural conversation, you eventually need substantial exposure to how people actually talk when they're not deliberately speaking clearly for an audience of learners. As your ear becomes more trained in recognizing these natural connected speech patterns, something wonderful happens beyond just improved listening comprehension. Your own speaking naturally starts adopting these same patterns too, without you even consciously trying to force it. This happens because listening and speaking are deeply connected systems in your brain, and as you internalize how natural English actually sounds, your own production system begins mimicking those same natural patterns automatically. This is yet another example of how these different pillars we're discussing throughout this video, listening, speaking, pattern recognition, all reinforce and accelerate each other when practiced together consistently. Chapter 9. Creating a daily practice routine that actually builds automaticity. By this point in the video, you've learned a tremendous amount, understanding why translation blocks automatic speech, why listening input matters so much, the power of chunks over individual words, thinking directly in English, shadowing for muscle memory, overcoming fear, sentence pattern drilling, and training your ear for natural connected speech. But here's the honest truth that I need to share with you now. Understanding all of these concepts intellectually will not by itself make you an automatic speaker. Only consistent, structured, daily practice will actually rewire your brain and build the automatic patterns we've been discussing throughout this entire video. So let's build you a realistic, sustainable daily routine that incorporates everything we've covered without overwhelming you or requiring hours upon hours of free time you probably don't have. The goal here isn't perfection or an unrealistic amount of daily practice. The goal is consistency, because as we discussed with the shadowing technique, frequent moderate practice beats occasional intense practice every single time when it comes to building automatic procedural skills. Here's a sample structure you can adapt to your own schedule and needs. Begin with roughly 10 minutes of focused listening input, using the layered listening approach from Chapter 2, choosing short, natural content and listening actively, ideally with a transcript to reinforce understanding. This primes your brain with fresh, natural language patterns right at the start of your practice session. Follow this with 10 to 15 minutes of shadowing practice, using either the same clip from your listening session or a separate short clip you enjoy. Remember to speak at full volume, really engaging your mouth and articulation, focusing on rhythm and natural connected speech rather than perfect word-for-word accuracy. Next, spend about 10 minutes on sentence pattern practice, taking whatever grammar structure you're focusing on that week and generating multiple spoken sentences using that pattern, applied to your own real-life topics and experiences, pushing for speed and flow rather than careful, slow construction. Throughout the rest of your day, outside of this dedicated practice time, incorporate the thinking in English habit from Chapter 4 during ordinary moments, commuting, cooking, exercising, cleaning, using these otherwise unused minutes to build direct English thought patterns without any extra time commitment required beyond what you're already spending on these daily activities anyway. Finally, whenever possible, even just a few times a week, seek out actual speaking opportunities with another person, whether that's a language exchange partner, a patient friend, an online conversation group, or even a tutor. This real interactive practice, even in small amounts, provides something that solo practice alone cannot fully replicate: the genuine, unpredictable, real-time demands of actual conversation, which ultimately is the exact skill you're building toward. If you're wondering how long all of this takes, realistically, we're talking about 30 to 40 minutes of dedicated, focused daily practice, plus the thinking in English habit woven into moments you already have throughout your day anyway. This is genuinely sustainable for almost anyone, regardless of how busy your schedule is, and I would much rather you commit to 30 consistent minutes daily than to an unsustainable 2-hour session that you can only manage once a week before burning out and giving up entirely. I also want to address something important about tracking progress, because automatic speech develops gradually, and it can sometimes feel like you're not making progress even when you genuinely are, simply because the changes happen beneath conscious awareness at first, exactly because we're building automatic, procedural patterns rather than easily measurable conscious knowledge. I recommend keeping a simple practice journal, nothing complicated, just a quick note after each practice session: what you practiced, how it felt, whether anything felt easier than before. Every few weeks, look back at your earlier entries, and you'll likely notice genuine progress that wasn't obvious day to day, patterns that used to feel effortful now feeling more natural, hesitations that used to happen constantly now happening less frequently. Remember also that consistency matters more than intensity, and progress in automatic speech is rarely linear. Some days will feel like breakthroughs, where words flow more easily than ever before. Other days will feel frustrating, like you've forgotten everything you've worked on. This is completely normal and expected in skill development of any kind, whether we're talking about language, music, sports, or any other trained ability. Trust the process, stay consistent, and the automatic patterns will continue building beneath the surface, even on days when progress doesn't feel obvious. Let me also address a few common obstacles that tend to show up once someone actually tries to follow a routine like this, because knowing about them in advance makes them far easier to push through when they appear. The first obstacle is motivation dropping after the first week or two, once the initial excitement of starting something new fades and the practice starts to feel like just another task on your to-do list. This is completely normal, and the way through it is not waiting for motivation to magically return, but rather relying on the structure itself, the same fixed time and place every day, so that showing up becomes a habit rather than a decision you have to make fresh each morning. Attach your practice to something you already do without thinking, right after you brush your teeth, right before you check your phone in the morning, right after you sit down on your commute, so the routine has an anchor point that doesn't depend on willpower alone. The second obstacle is the temptation to skip listening and shadowing and jump straight to speaking with people, because speaking feels like the real goal and everything else can feel like it's just delaying the real work. I understand this impulse completely, but remember what we discussed about the bank account metaphor in Chapter 2. If you skip the deposits and only attempt withdrawals, you'll keep running into the same wall of hesitation and translation that brought you to this video in the first place. Trust the layered structure. The listening and shadowing genuinely accelerate your speaking rather than delaying it. The third obstacle is perfectionism creeping into your practice sessions, where you keep rewinding the same 3 seconds of audio over and over, trying to catch every single sound perfectly before moving on, or you refuse to attempt a sentence pattern drill until you're certain you'll say it correctly. This kind of perfectionism actually slows down automaticity, because automatic speech is built through volume and repetition, not through obsessing over individual attempts. Give yourself permission to move through material at a reasonable pace, accepting that some sounds and words will need several more exposures across future sessions before they truly click, and that this is completely fine. Finally, don't underestimate the value of practicing at a consistent time of day if your schedule allows it. Just as your body adapts to a regular sleep schedule, your mind adapts to a regular practice schedule, and over time, that specific time slot starts to feel like your English time, a mental switch that flips you into a slightly more receptive, more focused state simply because of the association you've built through repetition. If mornings work best for you, protect that morning slot. If evenings work best, protect that evening slot. The specific time matters far less than the consistency of returning to the same time again and again. Chapter 10. From automatic sentences to real automatic conversations. We've covered an enormous amount of ground together in this video, and now, in this final chapter, I want to bring everything together and talk specifically about the bridge between all of this individual practice and actual, real, flowing conversations, because ultimately that's the real goal here. Not perfect isolated drills, but genuine, comfortable, automatic communication with real people about real topics. Here's something important to understand about this final stage of the journey. All the practice we've discussed, shadowing, pattern drilling, thinking in English, ear training, builds the raw materials and the automatic foundations you need. But real conversation adds an additional layer of complexity that none of these individual exercises fully replicate on their own. The layer of genuine unpredictability. In a real conversation, you don't know what the other person will say next. You have to listen, process meaning, formulate a relevant response, and produce that response, all within a natural time frame, without a script, without knowing the topic in advance, without controlling the pace. This is exactly why, even after building strong automatic foundations through the practices we've discussed, you still need dedicated practice, specifically in unpredictable, real conversational contexts, to train your brain to apply all of these automatic patterns flexibly and spontaneously, under genuine real-time pressure. Think of everything we've covered so far as building an incredibly well-equipped toolbox, chunks, patterns, pronunciation, listening skills, all ready and available. Real conversation practice is where you learn to reach into that toolbox instantly, grabbing exactly the right tool for whatever unexpected situation arises, without pausing to search through the entire box first. Here's how to approach this final stage effectively. Start with what I call semi-structured conversation practice. Conversations where there's some predictable structure, but genuine spontaneous elements too. This might mean practicing common conversation scenarios, ordering food, discussing weekend plans, describing your job, but doing so with a real conversation partner who responds genuinely and unpredictably rather than following a fixed script. This gives you enough predictability to feel confident while still requiring genuine real-time processing and response. Gradually expand into fully open, unstructured conversation, discussing whatever topics naturally arise, the way conversations happen in real life. During these conversations, resist the urge to mentally translate or carefully construct every sentence before speaking, trusting instead in the automatic patterns you've built through consistent practice. Yes, you will still make mistakes. You will still occasionally search for a word, and that's completely fine and expected. Remember what we discussed in Chapter 6 about mistakes being a natural, essential part of the process rather than something to fear. One particularly powerful practice at this stage is what I call conversation replay. After having a real conversation in English, whether it went smoothly or felt difficult, spend a few minutes afterward mentally replaying it. Notice moments where you felt hesitant or had to search for words, and think about what chunk, pattern, or phrase would have helped in that specific moment. Then practice that specific phrase a few times, connecting it directly to that real memory of needing it. This creates incredibly strong, personally relevant learning, because you're filling in gaps that you've personally experienced as genuinely needed, rather than practicing generic content that may or may not ever come up in your actual life. I also want to encourage you to deliberately increase the variety of conversation partners and contexts you practice in, because automatic speech that feels comfortable with one specific person, perhaps a patient friend you've talked to many times, doesn't always transfer immediately to conversations with new people, different accents, different conversation styles, or higher pressure situations like professional settings. Gradually expanding the variety of contexts you practice in helps ensure your automatic speech generalizes broadly, rather than remaining narrowly tied to one specific comfortable situation. Finally, and I think this might be the most important thing I can leave you with, understand that becoming an automatic English speaker is not a destination you arrive at and then you're finished. It's an ongoing relationship with the language that continues developing throughout your life, the same way even native speakers continue expanding their vocabulary, refining their expression, and adapting to new contexts throughout their entire lives. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is genuine, comfortable, automatic communication, where your mind is focused on what you want to say and what the other person is saying, rather than on the mechanical process of constructing sentences. You've now learned everything you need to genuinely transform how you speak English. From understanding why translation blocks automatic speech, to building listening foundations, to mastering chunks over isolated words, to thinking directly in English, to physically training your mouth through shadowing, to overcoming the fear that freezes your speech, to drilling flexible sentence patterns, to training your ear for natural connected speech, to building a sustainable daily routine, and finally, to bridging all of this into genuine, flowing, real conversation. This is a complete, comprehensive path, and every single piece of it is something you can start practicing today, not someday in the future when you feel ready, but right now, in whatever small way fits into your current life and schedule. Before we close, I want to leave you with a longer-term perspective, because I don't want you to think of everything we've discussed today as a short program you complete and then set aside. The truth is, the learners who reach the highest levels of automatic, comfortable English speech are almost always the ones who treat their practice as an ongoing part of their life. The same way someone who loves fitness doesn't stop exercising once they reach a certain goal, but instead builds movement into their lifestyle permanently, adjusting the intensity and focus over time as their needs change. In the early months, your focus will naturally lean heavily on the foundational pieces we discussed: listening input, shadowing, basic pattern drilling, thinking in English during simple daily moments. As you progress, you'll naturally want to shift more of your time toward real conversation, toward more advanced and nuanced chunks and expressions, toward topics that matter specifically to your work, your interests, and your relationships. Let your practice evolve with you rather than rigidly following the exact same routine forever. The principles in this video, direct thought without translation, chunk-based learning, physical mouth training through shadowing, fear reduction through gentle repeated exposure, flexible pattern practice, natural connected speech awareness, and genuine unpredictable conversation, these principles remain valuable at every single stage of your journey, from early intermediate all the way through advanced fluency, even for people who have technically been speaking English for decades but still want to sound more natural and automatic. I also want to gently remind you that plateaus are a completely normal part of this journey. There will be stretches of time, sometimes several weeks, where it feels like nothing is improving no matter how consistently you practice. This does not mean the method has stopped working. Skill development, in language and in every other domain, often happens in what researchers describe as a step pattern rather than a smooth incline, periods of invisible internal consolidation followed by a noticeable jump in ability rather than steady, visible daily improvement. If you find yourself in a plateau, the answer is almost never to abandon the approach, but rather to trust the process, perhaps introduce some variety into your practice content to keep things engaging, and continue showing up consistently, knowing that the next noticeable jump in your automatic fluency is likely closer than it feels in that frustrating moment. I want to genuinely thank you for staying with me through this entire journey today. If this video helped shift how you think about your own English learning journey, I genuinely encourage you to come back to it, perhaps revisiting one chapter at a time as you actually implement these practices, because rewatching with fresh context after some practice often reveals insights you might have missed the first time through. Remember, you are not broken, you are not slow, you are not bad at languages, you simply needed the right training approach, and now you have it. Trust the process, stay consistent, be patient and kind with yourself along the way, and I promise you, the day will come when you open your mouth to speak English and the words simply arrive, automatically, naturally, without that exhausting translator working overtime in your head. That day is closer than you think, and it starts with what you choose to practice starting today. This has been The Speaking Mindset. I'm William Parker, and I'll see you in the next one.